Johnny Tremain, Chapter 2, The Pride of Your Power, Part 5. Before reading, consider these questions, and while you read, try and find answers to them. Number 1. How did the Lapham girls and the other two boys treat Johnny now? Number 2. What does Mr. Lapham expect Johnny to do regarding his hand? And number 3. What does Mr. Lapham expect Johnny to do regarding Dove? Part 5. At first, Mrs. Lapham tended to humor the poor boy. As he preferred the birth and death room to the attic with Dove and Dusty, she had let him stay on. He had never, in all his life, slept in a bed alone, much less a whole room. He wanted to be alone. There was one trouble with his new quarters. When Mrs. Lapham came down to start breakfast, she always began by getting him up. "Get into your clothes, you lazy boy. Stop by at Deacon Parsons for a quart of milk. Get to the town pump." Soon enough, she was addressing him as a lazy good-for-nothing, a lazy lug-a-bed, a worthless limb of Satan. Such words poured out of her absent-mindedly, but never in the old days had she called Johnny such names. The boy least necessary in the shop had always done chores. Now both Dove and Dusty were more valuable than Johnny Tremain. Every morning he put on the heavy wooden yoke, trudged over to North Square for drinking water. Now for the first time he learned to handle a broom properly. He carried in charcoal for the annealing furnace in the shop and wood for the cooking hearth in the kitchen. And as he moved restlessly about, and often failing to do this humble work, Scylla and Asana watched him and said little, never a single insult. He had made it clear to them he wanted to be left alone. Madge and Dorcas found innumerable small tasks for him. Now he wasn't doing anything. Once fat Madge had him sit before her holding a skein of yarn from which she wound a ball. He was miserable with his crippled hands stretched out for all the world to see. When she mentioned it, he threw the yarn at her head and walked off. One day, Mr. Lapham called to him and led him to a bench under the old willow behind the coal house. The old man had never once berated him for Sabbath breaking, never reminded him how often he had pointed out that pride goeth before a fall. "My boy," he said mildly, "soon it will be September. Summer is over." Johnny nodded. "And I feel I must talk with you. When I signed for you, Johnny, there was a mutual contract between your mother and myself. She's dead, so the contract is now between you and me. I promised to feed and clothe you, keep you in good discipline, and as far as your capacity permitted to teach you the silversmith's arts and mysteries. I never had a boy so quick to teach, and you promised to serve me diligently for 7 years, to keep my secrets and my honor. You've done all that, Johnny, but now, I can't keep my contract with you. I can't teach a cripple-handed boy to be a silversmith." Johnny said nothing. "Mrs. L. is right," the old man went on. "You mean she wants you to get rid of me?" "Not exactly, but she does think it is an extravagance for a poor household to keep a boy just for chores. But I've told her," there was an unexpected glint of determination in the groping old eyes, "I've told her as long as you wish you are to stay with us, I won't ever turn you out. I mind the time your mother came to my shop with you. She was a sweet lady, very genteel. She said your heart was fastened on being a silversmith. She said you was a bright boy. You always was that. Now, Johnny, it's for your own good I'm talking to you. You've got to learn another way of supporting yourself. I want you to go around, look about the shops, and find out a respectable trade where a bad hand won't matter too much. You're a bright boy, Johnny. Maybe a rope maker or a cooper or a weaver could teach you his craft. That hand of yours will soon be strong enough, but will always sort of be doubled in on itself." Johnny started to look at his hand, but quickly thrust it back in his pocket. "You're right," he said. "I've got to go." "I don't want you to feel hurried about leaving us, Johnny. You're just about earning your keep by the odd jobs you do, in spite of what Mrs. L. says. You look about you quietly, and find a trade to your fancy, and a master you think you'd like. You can tell him from me I'll give the rest of your time away for nothing." It was less than 2 months ago Mr. Revere was promising something extra for his time. "Mrs. L. doesn't like it the way you loiter off and go swimming. But you loiter and swim all you have a mind, just so you get the chores done and settle down real hard to finding yourself a new trade. And one more thing I have on my mind." "Yes, sir." "I want you to forgive Dove like a Christian." "Forgive him? Why?" "Why, that when you asked for a crucible he handed you the old cracked one." "You mean he did it on purpose?" "No, no, Johnny. He only meant to humiliate you. He tells me Mrs. L. made me question him that he was that offended by your Sabbath breaking, he thought it fitting that you should learn a lesson. I can't help but admit I'm encouraged with that much piety in one of my boys." Johnny's voice sounded strangled. "Mr. Lapham, I'm gonna get him for that." "Hush, hush, boy, I say, and Bible says, forgive. He was real repentant when he told me. Never meant to harm you. He was in tears. He's going to be in a lot more of those tears before I'm done with him. That scabby white louse, that hypocritical—" "Hold your tongue, boy. I thought misfortune had taught you patience." "It has," said Johnny. "If I have to, I'll wait 10 years to get that dove." But he quieted himself instantly, and thanked his master for his kindness. As he walked past the shop, he saw Dove and Dusty hanging idly out of the shop window. They were looking for him. Dove said, "Will Mr. Johnny Tremain be so kind as to fetch us drinking water? Mrs. Lapham says we are too valuable to leave our benches. She told us we were to send you." Without a word, he went to the back entry, put on the heavy yoke. Understandably, the sight of Johnny wielding a broom, carrying charcoal, firewood, water, had not quickly lost its fascination for his erstwhile slaves. They were still hanging out of the window. "Look sharp, Johnny!" "Hey, boy, look sharp!" Giggles, a low whistle. Johnny said nothing.